Hello everyone, today our presentation will be discussing Brexit, with a distinct focus on the effects of human rights if the deal occurs. We'll be analysing the Human Rights Act along with the ECHR, the Charter, in correlation to the potential issues that could arise if Brexit follows through. The goals and objectives for this presentation is to provide insight into potential issues that can affect UK citizens along with the immigrants and UK migrants.
The long-embedded tradition of EU-affiliated laws has created a tumultuous amount of issues in different political and social arenas. The Court of Justice of the European Union, the Charter of Fundamental Rights, along with the Human Rights Act of 1998 are the three main actors that each section will be founded upon. These documents will most likely be exploited during Brexit.
Our goal is to specifically analyse the different regions within the human rights spectrum and establish whether a Brexit deal will have a daunting effect on human rights in the UK. The topics we will cover are immigration, asylum, equal treatment associated with non-discrimination, family rights, children's rights, and lastly, disability.
After each section has been analysed, a common argument should emerge. The effects of Brexit will alter the human rights of specific areas. However, holistically, the UK will have to uphold the maintenance of human rights standards in order to satisfy the political and social pressures of local and European actors.
Immigration and asylum is a heavily discussed topic regarding all Western states. With the introduction of Brexit, the topic of immigration and asylum becomes an even more convoluted issue. Leaving the European Union means ending the Free Movement Agreement, which essentially allowed no boundaries for EU migrants to move, integrate, and establish life within EU states. Brexit will end the ability to move into the UK as an EU migrant without any restrictions moving forward. Furthermore, this creates issues with human rights based on the individuals living in the state and the potential attitudes towards those individuals. According to the Withdrawal Act of 2019, EU citizens living in their host state before the end of transition will have permanent resident rights under the withdrawal agreement, subject to certain requirements. It's important to look at the words subject to certain requirements, which means for the potential for current citizens living in the UK who have migrated from the EU, there's the chance for the reapplication of residency status with the potential for more restrictions. This limits the rights to liberty for the individual under the ECHR and under the Human Rights Act. A potential example for this would be an individual of Muslim descent who had migrated from Belgium to the UK in 2013. That individual may be subject to intense scrutiny due to his religious rights and because of the elimination of free movement. Attitudes towards immigration may change, limiting the overall legal freedoms of the actual migrant. This violates the individual's right to liberty and security, along with their right to freedom of religion. If the new immigration policy created by the Conservative government is efficient and fair, then this issue becomes null and void. However, until there is certainty around immigration, there will continue to be discussions regarding the safety of immigration within the UK. Asylum is another area that needs to be touched upon when relating to human rights issues. Denying asylum to individuals seeking protection creates negative connotations on the United Kingdom as a whole. A Brexit scenario could potentially create unsafe pathways for refugee families. This was expressed by the Home Secretary's subcommittee. They stated that there could be a loss for a safe, legal route for the reunion of separated families within Europe. The UK's sudden departure from the European system could have considerable humanitarian effect on separated refugee families and unaccompanied children. This would essentially leave them within a legal limbo. However, there have been talks of cooperation between the sides to find some common ground as a newly proposed EU-UK asylum agreement. By limiting the rights of immigrants and asylum seekers, you create issues with fractured state relationships. The limitation of legal rights will create intense pressure from other states in the form of trade tariffs, asylum norms, and foreign affairs. Therefore, it is likely that the UK will take a less abrasive approach and create some common ground around legal opportunities in order to establish fair political relationships with EU members. Nevertheless, the ambiguity about the ways to establish these agreements is concerning.
What is the legal effect of leaving the European Union on equality and non-discrimination rights? As stated before, the result of Brexit inevitably means the removal of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. The article which I will be looking at is Article 21. This article provides a broad but unequivocal framework for prohibiting discriminations. Article 21 focuses on any discrimination based on any grounds such as sex, race, colour, and any other expressive traits shall be prohibited. Despite the Charter being removed, essentially the Equality Act of 2010 is still going to be interpreted by UK courts in line with pre-Brexit decisions of the European Union Court of Justice. The EA consolidates the many EU directives which have been transferred into our domestic law. The EA also protects a lot of the aforementioned groups of society. However, as you'll hear later on by Anna, children's and disability rights are being more affected drastically. Due to the innate uncertainty of this topic, it has been said by many that there is no prohibiting the current government undermining this legislation subsequently. This would be highly controversial in our postmodern society, and it remains currently unlikely that there is a political will to dismantle large-scale equality protections. Looking at this from my perspective, I can clearly see that the government have a different agenda with regard to Brexit negotiations. I believe it is up to the members of Parliament who are representing the views of the people to drive the issue of equality and non-discrimination to ensure it's not pushed aside in the haste of Brexit. So what happens next? Well, this is a huge and uncertain question in the Brexit debate. There have been arguments of Britain imposing a UK version of Bill of Rights. This was in fact included in the Conservative 2015 election manifesto and was planned as new legislation to replace the Human Rights Act of 1998. Obviously, this topic area is multifaceted, yet the overarching conclusion is that there still will be protection of human rights after the withdrawal of the European Union. However, the removal of the Charter of Fundamental Rights produces loopholes in legislation which starts to infringe some equality and non-discrimination rights of minority groups within society.
Currently, Article 8 of the Human Rights Act protects the right to respect for your family and private life. This covers not being separated from your family and will become a prominent issue after Brexit occurs. One of the major points of concern is that there will be a loss of family security. When the Human Rights Act is repealed, Article 8 will no longer be in effect and the right to have and maintain relationships will be threatened. Under current case law from the CJEU, where a British national works abroad and returns to the UK, their spouse's admission and right of residence is governed by EU law, not national law. In the case of Sting, EU free movement overruled domestic legislation allowing him to remain in the UK. In the future, Brexit will mean that the UK's domestic legislation will set precedent, and it's unlikely that cases will have a similar ruling to Sting again. There is some evidence to suggest that measures are being made to protect family rights. In a report called Brexit, the Immediate Legal Consequence, Richard Gordon noted that in light of changes to the law, factors such as family connections and rights of children will have to be considered in order to judge the proportionality of a proposal to deport someone. This would ensure each case minimises the breach of family rights, but it would also be more costly and time-consuming, and therefore it's not an appropriate solution. Overall, with regards to family rights in the UK, there's a lot of uncertainty over what position we'll be in. These rights may be protected under Article 8 of the ECHR, but it does not hold the same amount of protection as EU law. While human rights will be affected in the way that a sense and feeling of security is lost, it's unlikely for the UK government to establish laws that would breach Article 8, as this would not only have legal repercussions, but cause uproar and controversy in a nation which is arguably already divided. An area of family rights that is perhaps more significant is the rights of children. According to rightsinfo.org, a child left undocumented after Brexit will not have the necessary status to be able to stay in the UK. This interferes with private life and personal identity, and is more of an issue than families being separated, as children are not protected in the ECHR, whereas private life and family life is.
Following on from what Hannah has said, children's rights also affect the fate of families in the UK. Due to the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union not being carried forward into UK legislation, Article 24 of this charter named the rights of the child will not be incorporated. The HRA and the ECHR do not have any specific articles outlining the rights of children. Therefore, this leaves possible gaps in legislation and a high potential level of vulnerability for young people, since their rights are guaranteed no protection. However, it is almost certain that due to political and social pressures, as well as basic morals, the UK government will have to uphold children's rights. We will also no longer be members of organisations such as the European Arrest Warrant and the European Criminal Records Information System. In the case of trafficking of children, it will be a massive disadvantage to not be part of these organisations, since they enable proficient communication between EU countries in order to exchange information. This poses a serious risk to UK children, since there will be less efficient correspondence in situations where time is of the essence. Furthermore, due to the powers of ministers to be able to amend legislation without Parliament's approval following Brexit, it leaves less scrutiny over the protection of children's rights, since there will be a narrower analysis of legislation. Also, the transposition of EU law into UK law will not necessarily be complete. As an example, there is the 2011 Human Trafficking Act, which was transposed into domestic law using several other acts, including the Modern Slavery Act of 2015, but did not include all provisions. Due to this, there are no guardians for child victims of trafficking in some EU member states, giving a clear example of loopholes created in legislation by non-complete transposition. Looking now at the rights of people with disabilities, they will most likely be affected due to Article 14 of the HRA named Prohibition of Discrimination being at risk. This is due to the future reduction of disabilities rights protection. An example can be seen where the Framework Directive for Equal Treatment in Employment and Occupation, part of EU legislation, built upon the Disabilities Discrimination Act 1995, which was part of UK law. By no longer having EU law set precedent, we will lose out on future developments and improvements to disability law. However, a possible benefit to this is having control of our own legislation and being able to adhere it to the specific needs of those with disabilities in the UK.
This presentation has helped highlight some of the key issues within human rights issues involving the topic of Brexit. Immigration and asylum are areas where the ambiguity and uncertainty around the requirements of migrants within the Withdrawal Act may potentially create some issues. Limiting the rights of individuals and isolating them may eventually lead to xenophobic attitudes.
With regard to equality and non-discrimination rights, it would be fair to conclude that there will be little legal effect occurring within these sectors. Societal pressures and public outcry is a predominant factor in limited change within UK legislation. Furthermore, the acceptance towards a more progressive society has created a more welcoming environment for minority groups in society, such as the LGBTQ community.
Family rights will certainly be less secure, but it's unlikely for the government to remove them completely due to societal and legal repercussions. In spite of this, it's necessary for the government to establish clearer laws and guidelines so that citizens are aware of their rights.
Children's and disabilities rights currently look like they will be affected due to non-inclusive legislation. However, it's likely after Brexit that these mentioned rights will have to be upheld due to fear of public backlash. However, the government should be committed to ensuring that all these rights are protected fully. For example, as stated in Disability Rights UK's Brexit manifesto, the UK needs to be committed to being ahead of the curve in regards to disability rights. For example, having standards equivalent to the new European Accessibility Act.
One problem that we encountered during our research was the variety of views online and in academic journals. The left and right-wing opinions can easily sway a reader's understanding of Brexit. It is imperative to us that the information that we incorporated in our presentation was unbiased and had no political affiliation.
In conclusion, our overall argument remained consistent throughout our analysis. Brexit legislation has provided loopholes that cause opportunities for exploitation. However, despite these concerns, political and social pressures more than likely help maintain human rights in order to avoid the fracturing of UK and EU relationships. Thank you.